Imagine a nation's pride, a fleet of 30 world-class aircraft, vanishing into thin air within a few short decades. Nigeria Airways was once the undisputed king of African skies, a soaring symbol of independence and wealth. But today, those majestic planes are nothing more than rusted shells in forgotten hangars. How did a billion-dollar aviation giant collapse into total bankruptcy? It wasn't just bad luck, it was a calculated destruction fueled by greed, political interference, and a catastrophic failure of leadership. Founded in 1958, just before Nigeria gained independence from colonial rule, the airline was meant to be the wings of a new nation. It represented a bold promise to the world that West Africa would lead the continent's industrial future. At its peak, the carrier employed thousands of highly skilled dark-skinned African professionals, from pilots to engineers, all working under the iconic flying elephant insignia. The atmosphere was electric with hope, as every takeoff signaled Nigeria's rising global influence. The 1970s oil boom brought unprecedented wealth to Nigeria, and the airline reflected this golden era. Money flowed like water, allowing the company to purchase state-of-the-art jets like the DC-10 and Boeing 747. Inside these cabins, passengers enjoyed world-class luxury, served by attentive West African staff. It was more than a business, it was a diplomatic tool, showcasing the elegance and progress of a sovereign African giant to the capitals of London, New York, and Rome. However, behind the glamour, the seeds of destruction were being sown. As military regimes took control of the country, the airline became a personal playground for the ruling elite. Generals and politicians began to treat the national carrier as their private taxi service. Scheduled flights were frequently diverted or delayed simply because a high-ranking official decided they needed a plane for a personal errand. This flagrant abuse of power began to erode the airline's operational integrity and schedule reliability. The interference wasn't limited to travel. The boardroom became a revolving door of political appointees rather than aviation experts. Management positions were often handed out as rewards for loyalty rather than merit. This led to a culture of administrative chaos, where long-term planning was sacrificed for short-term political gains. Decisions on routes, maintenance, and staffing were no longer based on profitability, but on who held power in the capital city, setting the stage for a massive financial hemorrhaging. By the 1980s, the financial cracks were turning into deep canyons. Corruption became systemic, with funds intended for aircraft parts and fuel being diverted into private pockets. Maintenance schedules were ignored, and safety standards began to slip. The airline's once pristine reputation was tarnished as engines failed and ground equipment crumbled. The world took notice, and international aviation bodies began to raise red flags about the safety of the Nigerian fleet, causing a sharp decline in international passenger confidence. The debt began to pile up at an alarming rate. Nigeria Airways owed money to everyone, from foreign airports and fuel suppliers to catering companies and its own staff. Because of unpaid landing fees, several of the airline's flagship aircraft were seized in foreign cities like London and Paris. Imagine the humiliation of a national carrier's plane being impounded like a common debtor's car. These incidents weren't just financial losses, they were devastating blows to the national ego of Nigeria. In the streets of Lagos and Kano, the impact was felt by the ordinary people. Thousands of employees, from baggage handlers to veteran captains, began to experience months of unpaid salaries. Protests became a common sight at the company's headquarters. These were dark-skinned African men and women who had dedicated their lives to the flying elephant, now left with nothing. The human cost of the airline's mismanagement was immense, as families struggled to survive while the elite continued their excess. Desperate to save the sinking ship, the government looked toward privatization. However, experts argue that the model chosen was fundamentally flawed. Instead of a transparent transition to private ownership, the process was shrouded in mystery and questionable deals. New entities were formed, but they often lacked the capital and experience to manage a national airline. Rather than fixing the core issues of interference, the privatization attempt often served as another way for well-connected individuals to strip the remaining assets. In 2003, the final blow came. President Olusegun Obasanjo's administration ordered the total liquidation of Nigeria Airways. It was a shocking move that bypassed the National Assembly and ignored the pleas of the workers. In one stroke, over 40 years of aviation history was erased. The liquidation was meant to clear the way for a new partnership with a famous global airline brand, but many saw it as the ultimate betrayal of a national treasure for a foreign model. The partnership with Virgin Atlantic led to the birth of Virgin Nigeria, but it was a short-lived and turbulent marriage. Richard Branson eventually pulled out, citing the same political interference that had killed the original airline. He famously stated that the authorities were more interested in personal gains than running a viable business. This failure proved that simply changing the name or bringing in a foreign partner couldn't fix the deep-seated rot within the Nigerian aviation regulatory environment. Experts today point to a singular, glaring truth: while other African airlines like Ethiopian Airlines thrived through independence, Nigeria Airways was strangled by its own government. Ethiopian Airlines was run as a business, kept far away from the whims of politicians. In contrast, Nigeria Airways was treated as a parastatal, subject to the same inefficiencies as the civil service. This structural flaw ensured that no matter how much money was injected, the airline would always eventually fail. The ghost of Nigeria Airways still haunts the country's economy. The liquidation left a massive vacuum in the domestic market, which was quickly filled by small, private airlines that often lacked the scale to compete internationally. Nigeria lost its dominance in West African aviation, forcing travelers to rely on foreign carriers for international trips. This has resulted in billions of dollars in capital flight every year, as Nigerian travelers pay premiums to foreign airlines because their own national carrier no longer exists. Even more tragic is the fate of the pensioners. For nearly 15 years after the collapse, thousands of retired staff members fought a grueling battle for their promised benefits. Many died in poverty, unable to afford basic health care while waiting for the government to settle their accounts. These were the heroes of the 1970s, the pilots who flew the world and the engineers who kept the fleet safe, reduced to begging for their rightful earnings in their old age. The Guardian Nigeria recently highlighted that the collapse was a textbook case of how not to manage a national asset. Privatization, when done without transparency or genuine reform, often becomes a tool for asset stripping. The valuable landing slots in London and New York that Nigeria Airways once owned were lost or sold off under questionable circumstances. These were assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, gone forever because there was no strategic vision to protect the nation's interests during the liquidation. Recent attempts to launch a successor, branded as Nigeria Air, have been met with deep skepticism and legal battles. The public remains wary of any government-led aviation project, fearing that the same ghost of corruption and interference will return. The controversy surrounding the unveiling of a chartered plane as the new national carrier in 2023 only added to the cynicism. Nigerians are asking, have we really learned anything from the death of the flying elephant, or are we repeating history? The lesson of Nigeria Airways is a cautionary tale for all of Africa. It shows that natural resources and wealth are not enough to sustain a national icon if the institutions are weak. For an airline to survive, it must be insulated from the shifting winds of politics. It requires a professional management team that is empowered to make decisions based on data and market realities, rather than satisfying the egos of those in power in Abuja. If we look at the hangars at Matole Mohammed Airport today, we see a graveyard of ambitions. Rusted fuselages and stripped cabins serve as a silent reminder of what happens when corruption goes unchecked. Each abandoned plane represents thousands of lost jobs and a stolen opportunity for Nigeria to connect with the world on its own terms. The flying elephant didn't just crash, it was dismantled piece by the very people who were supposed to protect it. Why does this matter now? Because aviation is the lifeblood of modern trade and tourism. Without a strong national carrier, Nigeria remains at the mercy of global market fluctuations and foreign policy. Every time a Nigerian traveler pays an exorbitant fare to a foreign airline, they are paying the price for the 2003 collapse. Restoring the national carrier isn't just about pride, it's about economic sovereignty and reclaiming a lost piece of the country's industrial identity. The story of Nigeria Airways is also a story of missed mentorship. In the past, the airline trained the best pilots in Africa. Today, that knowledge gap is filled by expensive foreign training programs. The institutional memory of how to run a world-class airline was scattered to the winds when the company was liquidated. We didn't just lose planes, we lost the human capital and the systems that made Nigeria a leader in the global aviation community. Critics often blame the staff for the airline's failure, but history shows otherwise. While there were issues with unions, the primary cause was always at the top. When the leadership is compromised, even the best crew cannot save the ship. The workers were often the ones keeping the planes flying through sheer ingenuity, despite not having the necessary parts or support. Their dedication was met with a liquidation order that left them stranded without a future or a pension. As we look to the future, the question remains, can a new national carrier ever succeed in Nigeria? The answer depends entirely on whether the government is willing to step back. True privatization means giving up control, something that successive administrations have struggled with. For a new Nigeria Air to flourish, it must be born from a transparent process that prioritizes efficiency over political patronage, ensuring that the mistakes of the past are never repeated again on Nigerian soil. The tragedy of the flying elephant is a mirror for many of Nigeria's public institutions. It is a story of how a lack of continuity and the intrusion of politics can destroy even the most successful enterprises. By studying this collapse, we gain insight into the broader challenges facing the nation. It is a call to action for better governance, transparency, and the protection of national assets from the whims of those who seek personal gain over public good. Nigeria Airways may be gone, but its legacy serves as a powerful reminder of what Nigeria is capable of achieving when it dreams big, and what it risks losing when it fails to protect those dreams. The skies over West Africa are still waiting for a giant to return. Whether that giant will be a revived national carrier or a new era of transparent private aviation remains to be seen. But for now, the story of the fallen elephant remains a haunting lesson in history.